Welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is World War I, or the Great War, from 1914 to 1916. And we're going to talk about 5 terms that, as you read about this conflict, it's important to key in on these terms in order to start getting a sense of what happened during this period. Now, let's get into it. The first term for us is the Battle of Tannenberg. Okay? Now, the Battle of Tannenberg occurs in August of 1914. Most famously in the U.S., when we tend to think of the First World War, we think of the Western Front, we think of no man's land, we think of trenches, trench warfare, that kind of thing. We don't often and always remember that there was another side, there are many sides, to the First World War, and they are fought from the beginning. Germany invades France. Their invasion fails. That front stabilizes. Germany in 1914 has a series of armies on the move, and one of them is going to go in and attack Russia. Now, the Russian military is rather vast in 1914. They've got an alliance with the French. There's some aid that goes back and forth, some training that goes back and forth. But the Russian army is not exactly at the level that the German military or perhaps the British military would be, during this period. So when the battle happens, the German military kind of overwhelms the Russians and essentially destroys, it's basically their entire Second Army, over the course of a couple of days. So this is like August 26th through around the 30th, 1914. And it really demonstrated that the Germans were going to have a great deal of success kind of at the beginning in the war against Russia. And eventually, the Russians, of course, are going to lead the war. All right, secondly, the second term for us is something called the Battle of Gallipoli. Now, the Gallipoli campaign really is fought across much of 1915. The British had, partly through Winston Churchill, this idea that if the new comer to the war, the Ottoman Empire, dominated much at this point, of course, by Turkey, that if the British were able to kind of pull their resources and to attack at Gallipoli in Turkey, that they would be able to pull resources from the Germans that they had deployed throughout much of Europe. They'd have to pull them back. They'd have to send them down there. And it would really kind of be an opportunity for the British to kind of use the, sort of the soft underbelly, right, of the Mediterranean to kind of get in there. The only problem is that the campaign was an abject failure. The British commanders are, in most cases, old and have little experience. Many of these soldiers are Anzac troops. They're Australian and New Zealand troops who really hadn't thought they would be deployed here to fight. And the Turks, of course, want to defend their country, and they do so very strongly, with the support of their allies. And so it's a long, drawn-out campaign, and there's about 500,000 casualties, and it's very brutal. And so Gallipoli ends, mostly in defeat for the Allies in 1915. The third term for us is something called the Battle of Verdun. Now, Verdun is named for a city in France that in early 1916 becomes the focus of German offensives, of German attacks. By 1916, the Germans had come to this belief of, okay, let's try to just bleed the French dry. Let us try to, through annihilation, just kill as many French soldiers as we can, and we'll pick a point in the line and we'll do that, and that's going to lead the French to have to give up. So what will happen then is kind of a political change in France where you start to see, at least at the beginning, this real sort of sense of patriotism to fight this battle. And eventually a sense of mutiny that'll occur here too, but this is going to take some time. Verdun is a nearly 10-month campaign. It begins in February of 1916. It goes all the way till December when we're talking casualties on both sides. And again, this is that sort of stalemated trench warfare conflict going back and forth. 1.2 million casualties. I mean, this is an absolutely brutal thing. All right, fourth term for us, the Battle of the Somme. Now, the Battle of the Somme is also fought on the Western Front. It's fought in 1916. It was an attempt on the part of the British to be able to take the pressure off for the French and what they were enduring at Versailles. But of course, the British leadership is still supportive of this idea of going over the top, static conflict, and it's a disaster. At least the first day is. The first day, July 1st, 1916, the British send 120,000 troops over the line. Half are killed or wounded. It's like 19,000, 20,000 killed in one day. Right? This is the worst day in British history. It's a very, very, very terrible event. Fifth term for us, the Battle of Jutland. All right, the Battle of Jutland. Now, you may have been familiar, you may have heard of the Battle of Jutland. I know that in my work, the Battle of Jutland tends to be that one thing that World War I buffs love to quiz people on. The Battle of Jutland is a naval battle, and it happens in May and June of 1916, May 31st and June 1st to June 1st, 1916. There's three parts of it. You don't really need to know all of that. What you do need to know is the Germans kind of try to draw out the British Navy with the hope that they can destroy some of it. Now, the British Navy at this point is the most powerful navy in the world, and this section of the British Navy is led by a guy named Admiral Sir John Jellicoe. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but what the British are able to do effectively here is kind of sustain what the Germans kind of bring at them and really cause a great deal of conflict here with the Germans. So both sides, when it's over, are going to claim that they won. So there are about 14 British ships that are sunk here and about 11 German ships that are sunk here. But the British Navy is so wide and so vast that they're able to kind of sustain this. For the Germans, it's much more difficult. They, of course, are going to have to retreat, and the British are kind of able to operate still with more impunity than they had been before. The Battle of Jutland is also somewhat famous because it's kind of the last major battle in world history where battleships are kind of the primary force that are used here. Right? It's really after the Battle of Jutland you don't see battleships engaging in open battle really anymore. All right, thanks.